There is a land on this earth where civilization did not begin gradually. It exploded, where people did not slowly figure out how to write, build cities, pass laws, or count time. They invented all of it simultaneously in the same river valley within a few centuries of each other 6,000 years ago. Every school on earth teaches children about ancient Greece and Rome. But the truth is, by the time the first Greek philosopher opened his mouth, the civilization between the Tigris and the Euphrates had already been rising and collapsing for 4,000 years. The Greeks were the students. This land was the classroom. And yet today, when most people hear the name Iraq, they do not think of the cradle of civilization. They think of war. They think of desert and destruction and decades of grim headlines. How did the land that gave the world writing, law, mathematics, astronomy, and the very concept of the city end up being remembered almost entirely for its suffering? This is the story of the oldest continuously inhabited territory on Earth, a land that has been conquered by everyone and erased by no one. A land that watched Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Mongols, Ottomans, and Americans all march through its gates. And a land that is still here, still breathing, still unfinished. To understand Iraq, you need to understand what two rivers can do to a desert. The Tigris and the Euphrates descend from the mountains of modern Turkey and flow southeast toward the Persian Gulf, cutting through what is otherwise one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. Between them, they deposit some of the richest silt in the world. Every flood season, the rivers overflow and leave behind a dark, fertile layer of soil that can grow almost anything. Ancient peoples called this region Mesopotamia, a Greek word meaning the land between the rivers. In the Sumerian language, it was simply called the Black Land, named for the color of that extraordinary soil. The first permanent settlements appeared here around 6,000 before Christ in the south, in the region called Sumer. These were not villages scraping by on subsistence farming. Within 1,000 years, they had become something the world had never seen. Cities: Eridu, Uruk, Ur, Nippur, Lagash. Each one a sovereign world with its own temples, its own markets, its own social hierarchy. Uruk, by 3,500 before Christ, had a population of around 50,000 people, making it almost certainly the largest city that had ever existed anywhere on Earth at that moment. And inside these cities, something happened that changed the human species permanently. People needed to track grain, to record debts, to keep inventory across harvests. And so, sometime around 3,400 before Christ, a Sumerian accountant pressed a reed stylus into a wet clay tablet and made the first marks that were not art and not ritual, but information. Writing, not as poetry, not as prayer, as a receipt. Civilization's first written document was a grocery list. From that accountant's clay tablet, every word you have ever read descends in an unbroken line. The Sumerians did not stop at writing. They built ziggurats, enormous stepped temple towers that dominated the flat landscape for miles in every direction, each one the axis of a city's religious and economic life. They developed a mathematical system based on the number 60 that we still use today every time we look at a clock. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. A circle divided into 360 degrees. These are Sumerian numbers, embedded in our daily lives like fossils in stone. But Sumer was never a unified empire. It was a collection of proud, competitive city-states that warred with each other constantly. And that chronic division made it vulnerable. In 2334 before Christ, a man from the region of Akkad to the north changed everything. His name was Sargon. His origins were, by his own account, humble. He claimed his mother was a temple priestess who placed him in a basket of reeds and set him adrift on a river, a story so similar to the later story of Moses that historians have debated the connection for centuries. Whatever the truth of his birth, what Sargon did was unprecedented. He conquered the Sumerian city-states one by one and united them under a single ruler for the first time in history, creating what historians call the world's first empire, the Akkadian Empire. At its height, the Akkadian Empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, from the mountains of Iran to the edge of Anatolia. Sargon ruled from his capital, Akkad, a city whose location we still have not found despite a century of searching. He installed his daughter Enheduanna as high priestess of the moon god in and Enheduanna became the first named author in the history of the world. Not an anonymous scribe, a poet writing hymns to the goddess Inanna under her own name 2,000 years before Homer. The first writer in history was a woman from Iraq. The Akkadian Empire collapsed around 2150 before Christ, brought down by a combination of internal rebellions and a prolonged drought that crippled agriculture across the entire Near East. But Mesopotamia did not go quiet. It simply reorganized. The third dynasty of rose from the ruins, followed by competing Amorite dynasties, followed eventually by the first Babylonian dynasty and the man who would become the most famous lawmaker of the ancient world. Hammurabi came to the throne of Babylon around 1792 before Christ and inherited a city that was not yet a great power. He was patient. For the first 20 years of his reign, he built temples, dug canals, forgave debts and strengthened alliances. He was not yet conquering. He was governing, and then, in his 30th year of rule, he began a series of campaigns that within a decade brought all of Mesopotamia under Babylonian control for the first time in centuries. What made Hammurabi extraordinary was not the military campaigns. Many kings won wars. What made him immortal was what he did after winning. He commissioned a legal code carved onto a stone pillar nearly 8 feet tall, topped with an image of Hammurabi receiving the laws from Shamash, the god of justice. The Code of Hammurabi contained 282 laws governing commerce, property, family, crime, and labor. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. These words, which still echo through legal philosophy and religious texts 3,500 years later, came from Hammurabi's pillar. The code was not perfect. Punishments varied based on social class. A free man who struck another free man faced the same blow in return. A free man who struck a slave paid a fine. But inside those inequalities were genuinely radical ideas. A woman could divorce her husband if he was abusive or unfaithful. A man could not sell a sick wife. If a slave woman bore children with a free man, those children were born free. Debt slavery had strict limits. The strong, Hammurabi declared, shall not oppress the weak. 37 centuries before modern human rights law, a king in the Iraqi desert had written that sentence in stone. Babylon's glory would be interrupted brutally. The Assyrians, a people from the north of Mesopotamia, around the city of Asher and later Nineveh, built the ancient world's most terrifying military machine. The Assyrian army was the first in history to use iron weapons at scale, to deploy siege engines capable of smashing city walls, to organize a professional standing force rather than a seasonal levy of farmers. They were methodical in a way that terrified their contemporaries. When they conquered a city, they did not simply loot it, they deported its population. Entire peoples uprooted and resettled hundreds of miles away. It was cultural annihilation as policy. In 689 before Christ, the Assyrian king Sennacherib did something that shocked the ancient world. He destroyed Babylon entirely. The city that had stood as the center of Mesopotamian civilization for 1,000 years was demolished, flooded, and wiped from the landscape. Sennacherib wrote about it himself, with evident satisfaction, describing how he filled the city's squares with the bodies of its inhabitants. 2 years later, he was murdered by his own sons. Mesopotamians did not believe in coincidence. Marduk, the god of Babylon, had taken his revenge. Babylon was rebuilt, and the civilization that rebuilt it produced something arguably more impressive than what Hammurabi had created. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, who came to power in 605 before Christ, the new Babylon became the largest and most magnificent city on earth. Walls so thick that 4-horse chariots could race along their tops and still have room to turn. The Ishtar Gate, covered in vivid cobalt blue glazed bricks and decorated with 575 dragons and bulls, so brilliant in the sun that travelers reported seeing it from miles away. A processional road wider than Broadway in New York, flanked by 120 life-sized glazed lions, a population of 200,000 at a time when Athens had 90,000 and Rome was still a collection of villages. Nebuchadnezzar also conquered Jerusalem, destroyed Solomon's temple, and brought the Jewish population into captivity in Babylon. The Babylonian captivity that echoes through the Bible, through Psalm 137, through the word Babylon itself entering the Hebrew and Christian imagination as both a real place and a symbol of exile. Then, in 539 before Christ, Cyrus the Great of Persia rode through Babylon's gates without a battle, welcomed by a population exhausted by their king and ready for something new. Babylon became a Persian city, and the long independent history of ancient Mesopotamia was over. What followed were centuries of passing hands. Persia. Then Alexander the Great, who actually planned to make Babylon his imperial capital before dying there in 323 before Christ at the age of 32, possibly poisoned, possibly from fever, in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar. Then the Seleucids, then the Parthians, then the Sassanids. Each empire absorbed Mesopotamia, taxed it, built on it, and moved on. But the transformation that would permanently reshape this land came not from the west, not from the north, not from the mountains of Persia. It came from the desert. In 637 after Christ, Arab armies riding under the banner of the newly born religion of Islam defeated the Sassanid Persian forces at the Battle of al-Qadisiyah in what is now southern Iraq. Within a year, the ancient Persian capital of Ctesiphon, located just south of modern Baghdad, had fallen. Mesopotamia became part of the Islamic Caliphate. What happened next was one of the most dramatic reversals in the history of civilization. The land that had been a conquered province became the center of the world. In 762 after Christ, the Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur built a new circular city on the western bank of the Tigris River and named it Madinat al-Salam, the City of Peace. The world would come to know it as Baghdad. Within 50 years, it had grown into the largest city on earth, with a population estimated at over 1 million people. The Islamic Golden Age that Baghdad anchored was not a local achievement. It was a global one. Scholars from across the known world, Arab, Persian, Greek, Indian, Jewish, Christian, gathered in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, the Beit al-Hikmah, and translated, preserved, and expanded the entire inheritance of ancient knowledge. Algebra was systematized there by al-Khwarizmi, whose name gives us the word algorithm. Optics were revolutionized by Ibn al-Haytham. Medicine was advanced by physicians whose textbooks would be used in European universities for 500 years. While Europe was navigating its dark ages, Baghdad was the intellectual capital of the planet. The streets that had once carried Sumerian accountants and Babylonian processions now carried mathematicians, astronomers, and philosophers from every civilization on Earth. Then the Mongols came. In 1258 after Christ, Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, arrived at the walls of Baghdad with an army estimated in the hundreds of thousands. The Caliph al-Mustasim refused to surrender. What followed was one of the most catastrophic single events in the history of civilization. The Mongols sacked Baghdad for 40 days. The House of Wisdom, with its hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, was destroyed. Ancient texts accumulated over 5 centuries of scholarship were thrown into the Tigris in such quantities that the river reportedly ran black with ink. The irrigation systems that had supported agriculture in Mesopotamia for 6,000 years were systematically dismantled. The population was slaughtered in numbers that some historians estimate in the hundreds of thousands. The Islamic Golden Age ended in 40 days. It did not matter who came next. Timur. The Ottomans, who controlled Iraq from 1534 until the First World War. The land between the rivers, birthplace of cities and writing and law, became a contested periphery, passing between empires, slowly depopulating the great irrigation networks that had sustained it for millennia, silting up and collapsing into desert. In 1920, Britain drew lines on a map. 3 former Ottoman provinces, Mosul in the north, Baghdad in the center, Basra in the south, were pressed together into a single entity called Iraq. The 3 provinces had different populations. Mosul was predominantly Kurdish and Turkmen. Baghdad was mixed, with a Shia majority and a large Sunni Arab governing class. Basra was overwhelmingly Shia. They had never been a single country. The British made them one. What followed was a century of trying to hold together what lines on a map had stitched. A monarchy installed by the British, a revolution in 1958 that ended the monarchy, a series of coups, then in 1968 the Ba'ath Party, and eventually one man above all others. Saddam Hussein formally took power in 1979 and within a year had launched a war against Iran that would last 8 years and kill somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people. Then, in 1990, he invaded Kuwait, triggering the Gulf War of 1991. Then, the sanctions that followed gutted the Iraqi economy and devastated its civilian population through the 1990s. Then, 2003, the American invasion on the grounds of weapons of mass destruction that were never found. The dismantling of the Iraqi army and the Ba'athist state, decisions that left hundreds of thousands of armed unemployed men without a future. The sectarian civil war, the rise of al-Qaeda in Iraq, and from its ruins, the emergence of ISIS, which in 2014 swept across a third of the country and declared a caliphate from the same Mesopotamian plains where Sargon had declared his empire 4,000 years earlier. The city of Mosul, built on the ruins of Nineveh, the ancient Assyrian capital, was occupied for 3 years. ISIS systematically destroyed ancient artifacts in the Mosul Museum, bulldozed the ruins of Nimrud, and blew up the tomb of the prophet Jonah. They were not simply destroying history. They were destroying the evidence that anything had existed in this land before Islam. In the birthplace of writing, they were trying to erase the record. But here is what the headlines never fully captured. While all of this was happening, something else was happening too. Iraq's population in 1950 was around 5 million people. Today, it is over 40 million. Across generations of war and sanctions and occupation and terrorism, Iraqis kept living, kept building families, kept burying their dead and raising their children. The ancient cities of Karbala and Najaf, holy to the world's 200 million Shia Muslims, receive millions of pilgrims every year, despite everything. The marshlands of southern Iraq, the Mesopotamian marshes that were drained by Saddam in the 1990s as collective punishment against the Shia population, were reflooded after 2003. The birds returned, the fishermen returned. A landscape that had supported the world's first settlements for 7,000 years was brought back from near total destruction in less than 2 decades. UNESCO added the Iraqi marshes to the World Heritage List in 2016. There is a pattern in this land that predates all of its modern borders and all of its modern names. Sumer collapsed and Akkad rose. Akkad collapsed and rose. Babylon was flooded and Babylon was rebuilt. Baghdad was burned and Baghdad survived. The land between the rivers has seen more destruction than perhaps any other place on earth, and it has never stopped being inhabited, never been emptied, never been truly erased. The world remembers Iraq for its most recent catastrophes, but the Mesopotamian plain does not define itself by what the last century did to it. It defines itself by what it gave the world 6,000 years ago. The first city, the first written word, the first law code, the first named author, the first empire, the first algebra, the first systematic astronomy. Every time you check the time, you are using a Sumerian number. Every time you read a law, you are reading the echo of Hammurabi. Every time you use the word algorithm, you are invoking a Baghdad mathematician who lived 12 centuries ago. The contributions of this land are not decorations on the margins of world history. They are the load-bearing walls of civilization itself. The question Iraq is living through right now is the same question it has always lived through, not whether it can survive. It has survived everything. The question is what it will build next, and given what this particular piece of earth has produced before, it would be a serious mistake to bet against it. This video is brought to you by the Paladin Learn History app.